What's going on, everyone? We are back with a brand new video, and I'm going to start off with what's becoming my normal disclaimer, is that I am in the four-wheel studio, aka my car. So, as always, if there is any variation in typical audio quality, please attribute it to that. So with that out of the way, I'm going to jump right into today's video. So the whole argument, confrontation, checking, whatever you want to call it, between Monica McNutt, Stephen A. Smith on, I'm assuming it was First Take because I don't watch ESPN shows like that, has made its rounds. It's gotten a lot of people talking, and you have a lot of people cheering Monica for quote-unquote shutting old Stephen A. up, that he looked absolutely speechless. What do they say? Surprise Pikachu face that he got. However, and there's loads of people talking about it, but I'm going to take a slightly different approach to this, because as I watched it, and a lot of people are, well, I won't say a lot of people, but the part of the discussion where she said, or she countered his point to, well, why weren't you talking about the WNBA 3 years ago? And Stephen A. Smith didn't really come back with anything, at least nothing substantial. And so, my whole thing, as I watched, I was like, that's a pretty easy question to answer, and I'm surprised he didn't. Well, no, I'm not surprised, because Stephen A. Smith has already been neutered by ESPN, at least since Michelle Beadle went on Karen on him and got him suspended following, I believe it was the Ray Rice situation, when he actually said a salient, logical, common sense point, in that basically people should keep the damn hands to themselves, regardless, man or woman, which is perfectly logical. It makes a lot of sense. But in this bizarro world that we live in now, if you say anything that actually makes sense, it's guaranteed it's going to offend some dingbat, some moron, in this case Michelle Beadle, and we are truly living in an idiocracy where the morons have more sway than the people with sense. Not saying Stephen A. Smith is necessarily a bastion of common sense, rationality, and things of that nature, but in that case, he was spot on. So, I wasn't expecting him to come back with what he simply could come back with. And because when I watched it, all I could think about was, this is a fairly easy question to answer. And Colin Cowherd is a pinhead, but once, even as Sidney Dean would say, even the sun shines on a dog's ass sometimes. And so when he brought up this point a couple years ago, because on his show, someone asked, or I guess he was responding to why he doesn't cover the WNBA. So I'm going to let you hear what he actually said when it comes to that.
Oh, we all know that. My issue with the WNBA has always been this, that a lot of people feel you should cover it, and instead of really being a sport, it's like a movement, like Go Green or organic. The only reason organic works in this country, because Whole Foods can make money off it. You know why Go Green slowed down? Couldn't make money off it. It didn't make any financial sense. The WNBA attendance, not good. The WNBA ratings, not good. The WNBA salaries, not good. It's not working because you, the consumer, don't want it, and I'm never going to cover anything because I feel it's a movement. I will cover women's sports should be covered when they're great. Otherwise, you're patronizing them. You're patting them on the head. You go, girl. I'm not interested. I cover the United States women's national soccer team. They're awesome. They're fun. They're athletic. They're really good. Women's tennis, we talked Serena yesterday several times. Cover that. But I'm not covering the WNBA because the consumers don't like it. And when sports become movements, and I've heard this for even Adam Silver, who I love, the commissioner of the NBA, says, I'm disappointed. I thought we'd be farther along. I wish people in power. That's not our job. The organic movement works because it makes people money. Go Green died down. It doesn't. You can't cover stuff because it's a movement. These are companies, Fox, ESPN, NBC, CBS Sports. Get out of the movement business. If it ain't making money, if eyeballs aren't watching, those companies have they owe their shareholders numbers, revenue, ratings. And if you don't produce it, they're not going to go with it. Organic works only because Whole Food makes a lot of money on it. If you couldn't make money on organic, we wouldn't have organic. We go back to the generic movement. Remember that about 20 years ago? You went to a grocery store. It was like black, white, generic. Nobody bought that stuff enough. So that didn't work.
Maria and Julio.
So those comments by Cowherd, I thought perfectly summed up why the NBA or the WNBA was not heavily talked about, be it on First Take or really any other show in heavy rotation. And to bolster that, I was watching an interview fairly recently, and Tim Legler, ESPN analyst, was talking about and this is when the Pacers were in the Eastern Conference Finals, and everybody was marveling at the time how well they were playing and things of that nature. And he was like, well, I wanted to talk about the Pacers throughout the season, but when I would try to bring it up in production meetings and whatnot, I was constantly it was basically being shot down because the Pacers weren't seen as quote-unquote a sexy enough story. And I say that to bring it back to this point, that, and this goes back to what Cowherd was saying, the WNBA at that time simply was not getting enough ratings. It was not the market really for it to be talked about like that. That's what it boils down to. And so, armed with what Tim Legler had to say then, of course, we're not going to talk about it. I mean, there's a reason why on these shows we're talking about basketball, the Lakers, for time, the Warriors, all of these teams that get people talking, that people talk about, that they're on the tips of people's tongue most of the time. There's a reason why they talk about the Lakers and even the Clippers and not the Atlanta Hawks, the Orlando Magic like that. And it's the same reason. Those particular teams don't draw in people. And bring that back to the WNBA as a whole, it wasn't hot like that. So these shows, whether it be First Take, Undisputed, Speak on It, Right On, or whatever these shows, they're going to talk about the topics, the teams, and the subjects people have the most interest in. And while that's good for them in terms of that's what's going to do the biggest numbers, it can get a little repetitive because what ends up happening is you're talking about the same 3 or 4 teams if you're talking about basketball and 5 to 10 players all the time. So it does get repetitive because there are great players and stories outside of those major market teams that don't get discussed. Secondly, even if he was talking about it, which I don't know why she's laying it solely at his feet, as if he is supposed to be the one that's supposed to elevate the WNBA like that. But even if he was, that in no way guarantees that people would tune in. Because if we're going by that logic, I mean, people, what's doing all right, I mean, there's a reason why ESPN, by and large, on those shows aren't talking about the MLS like that. There's a reason why some of these other shows, when was the last time you really saw a hockey segment on First Take? In hockey, I guess you could still say it's one of the biggest. Or they don't do that. Or track and field outside of Olympic years. It's the same reason. They're not talking about these sports because it doesn't move the needle. And up until this season, the WNBA wasn't moving the needle like that. So for her to say that, I thought was not only inaccurate, but I thought it was a little disingenuous to think that he should do that. I guess my question would be, while you're blaming him, what are you doing to elevate the WNBA 3 years ago? What were you doing? Because this whole thing of this armchair quarterbacking by some of these pundits now, because the WNBA has some momentum build up to kind of look back and say, well, why didn't you do this? And why didn't you do that? And it's usually talking to male pundits. It's as if, to blame them, because the reason why the WNBA was in the crapper for so many years in terms of in-game attendance, viewership, and all, is because men weren't talking about it. When men are the largest fan base, but nobody wants to get on television and say these sorts of things because they're worried about they'll get quote unquote canceled for saying what the real really is. So, like I said, and I know a lot of people are celebrating this, and I just really wanted to say this because maybe I'll delve into another video, because even now with the WNBA and their supporters, largely, some of the female supporters, and I'm talking to them on this, is because you've got the attention now, but because of how you're conducting yourself, either in coverage or talking about it, you stand the chance of running off the people that you're trying to ingratiate your league and your players to in terms of getting them to watch. They better understand that, because it's only a matter of time that you start to get a backlash, because even with Caitlin Clark, you're starting to see a little bit of that in terms of how she's covered, presented, and portrayed. And once you get that turned against you, it's really hard to stem that tide. So they better be wary of how they are making use of this newfound attention that they're getting. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end this video. I didn't want it to go on too long. It went on a little longer than I anticipated. But what do you think about the situation with Monica McNutt and Stephen A. Smith? I know that it's been a hot topic of discussion. Do you agree with her, with what she had to say? Just what are your thoughts on the situation? Let's have a conversation about it in the comments section. And as always, thank you for spending a few moments with us. And as always, make sure to tell the ones that you love